Close your eyes. Imagine an island. Not a small island. 4 main islands and thousands of smaller ones, strung along the western edge of the Pacific Ocean like a curved blade, stretching from the cold northern waters near Russia to the subtropical warmth of the Ryukyu chain. A country of extraordinary geographical diversity, volcanic mountains and ancient cedar forests, hot springs and rice paddies, high alpine meadows and tropical coral reefs. Japan, one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth, a country that has been continuously inhabited for at least 30,000 years, perhaps considerably longer. A country whose earliest known pottery, the Jomon ceramics, are among the oldest ever produced anywhere in the world, dating back 16,000 years or more. A country that, in some ways, we think we know very well. Samurai and geisha, cherry blossoms and Mount Fuji, Zen gardens and bullet trains. The Japan of popular imagination is vivid and specific and endlessly reproduced in Western culture. And yet beneath that familiar surface, the ancient history of Japan is full of questions that have never been answered, mysteries that the island itself seems to have decided to keep. Who were the first people of Japan, and where did they come from? What are the strange clay figures that the ancient people of Japan made in their thousands, for reasons that no one has ever fully explained? What lies beneath the sealed burial mounds that cover the Japanese landscape, mounds so sacred that the government will not permit them to be excavated? And what is the structure lying beneath the waves off the coast of Yonaguni, a place of angular stone terraces and carved steps that either represents the most significant archaeological discovery in the Pacific or the most extraordinary natural formation in the world, depending on who you ask? Tonight we visit 10 of Japan's deepest mysteries. 10 questions that the ancient island has kept to itself for thousands of years. So settle in, let the paper lantern flicker, let the night rain begin on the garden outside, and let Japan carry you gently to sleep. Mystery 1: who were the Jomon, and where did they come from? The story of ancient Japan begins with a people whose origins are still, despite decades of increasingly sophisticated genetic research, not fully understood. The Jomon. They were the first inhabitants of the Japanese archipelago, a people who lived on the islands for an extraordinary length of time. The Jomon period spans from approximately 14,000 BC to 300 BC, a period of roughly 13,000 years. To put that in perspective, the entire span of recorded human history is only about 5,000 years. The Jomon were making pottery, building settlements, and developing complex cultural traditions for a period more than twice as long as all of recorded history. Their name comes from the distinctive pattern on their pottery. Jomon means cord-marked, a reference to the technique of pressing twisted cords into wet clay to create decorative patterns before firing. This pottery, dating back 16,000 years, is among the oldest in the world. The Jomon were hunter-gatherers who became increasingly sedentary over time. They built permanent villages. They developed complex spiritual practices. They created elaborate material culture, not just the famous pottery but stone circles, elaborate burial sites, and the mysterious clay figurines that we will discuss in the next mystery. But where did they come from? This question has been debated by scholars for generations. The genetic evidence, which has become increasingly sophisticated in recent years, suggests that the answer is complicated. For a long time, the dominant theory about the origins of the Japanese people was the dual structure model, proposing that a group of people who entered the Japanese archipelago during the Paleolithic era became the Jomon people, and that later a group of Yayoi people from the continent arrived during the Neolithic era, interbred with the Jomon, and formed the modern Japanese population. Recent ancient DNA research has complicated this picture significantly. The genetic profile of the Jomon appears to be quite distinct from any population currently living in East Asia, suggesting that they may represent a very ancient lineage that diverged from other East Asian populations tens of thousands of years ago, perhaps during or before the last ice age. During the last ice age, lower sea levels meant that Japan's islands were connected to mainland Asia, allowing people to follow herds of animals into the archipelago. But the genetic distance between the Jomon and mainland Asian populations suggests that once they arrived on the islands, they developed in considerable isolation for a very long time. The Ainu people of Hokkaido, the northernmost of Japan's main islands, are the closest living descendants of the Jomon. They have distinct physical characteristics, including facial hair that is unusual among East Asian populations, and they speak a language that is completely unrelated to Japanese or any other known language family. The Ainu have been the subject of discrimination and marginalization in Japan for centuries, their status as the original inhabitants of the archipelago long denied. Modern genetic studies have confirmed what the Ainu themselves always knew, that they represent the closest living link to the ancient Jomon people, the first inhabitants of these islands. Where exactly the Jomon came from, which migration route, from which population, how long ago, remains an active area of research. What is clear is that they were here for an extraordinarily long time, developing one of the most distinctive and enduring archaeological cultures in the ancient world. And then, around 300 BC, something changed. New people arrived, the Yayoi. They brought rice farming, they brought bronze and iron, they brought a way of life that would gradually transform the islands. What happened to the Jomon when the Yayoi arrived is another mystery, not a sudden replacement, the genetics suggest, but a gradual mixing. The modern Japanese population carries genetic contributions from both groups, in varying proportions depending on which part of Japan you are from. The north of Japan, Hokkaido and the Tohoku region, carries more Jomon ancestry. The western regions of Honshu carry more Yayoi ancestry. The Okinawan people of the Ryukyu Islands carry a particularly high proportion of Jomon ancestry. Japan is, genetically as well as culturally, the product of multiple layers of people and time. Understanding the Jomon is understanding the deepest of those layers. Mystery 2. What were the Dogu figurines for? They are among the strangest objects in the ancient world. Small clay figures, most of them between 10 and 30 centimeters tall, with large round eyes, elaborate patterns pressed into their surfaces, exaggerated body proportions and expressions that seem to modern eyes simultaneously alien and deeply human. The Dogu, which translates to earthen figure, are small clay figures with humanoid or animal features that were created towards the later part of the Jomon period of prehistoric Japan. What makes Dogu figurines so fascinating is that scholars do not know what these little figures were created for or what they represent. They were made in enormous quantities. The Sanai Maruyama village site alone turned up 1,500 figurines. Nearly 4,000 figurines were recovered from sites in the Tohoku region. They have been found across Japan, from Hokkaido in the north to the central regions of Honshu, always in the Jomon cultural context, always from the period between roughly 5,000 and 300 BC. They are almost always broken. This is not accidental damage. The figurines were broken deliberately, and in ways that suggest the breaking was intentional and ritualistic rather than random. Many of them have been broken at specific joints, the arms, the legs, the head, suggesting that the act of breaking was itself meaningful, part of whatever ceremony or practice the figurines were used for. Various theories propose their role in fertility rites, ancestor veneration, or as representations of revered deities and spirits connected to the natural world. One theory, the most widely accepted among archaeologists, is that the dogu were used in healing rituals. The idea is that illness or injury was transferred symbolically to the figurine, which was then broken to destroy the illness. The broken figurine absorbed the suffering and the breaking released it. This interpretation is supported by the fact that many dogu appear to have physical abnormalities, swollen joints, distorted limbs, enlarged areas of the body that might represent injuries or diseases. If the figurine was meant to take on the illness of a sick person, it might be expected to show the signs of that illness. Another theory is that they were connected to pregnancy and childbirth. Many dogu have exaggerated female characteristics, enlarged hips, pronounced abdomens that suggest pregnancy, emphasized breasts. This has led some scholars to interpret them as fertility objects, used in ceremonies connected to the desire for children or the safe delivery of babies. A third theory focuses on their role as spiritual vessels and containers for spirits or ancestors, used in ceremonies of communication between the living and the dead. We do not know the purpose and significance of dogu figurines because writing in Japan began in the 6th century AD, a long time after the dogu were created. All theories and interpretations of what the dogu represented are speculations, and this is one of the many reasons why these little clay figures are so mysterious. The most famous of all the dogu is the so-called shakoki dogu, a figure discovered in Aomori Prefecture, now held in the Tokyo National Museum. It stands approximately 35 centimeters tall, with enormous goggle-like eyes that give it an appearance so otherworldly that it has sometimes been claimed by enthusiasts of ancient astronaut theories to represent an astronaut in a space suit. It does not represent an astronaut in a space suit, but the claim tells you something about how genuinely strange the dogu look to modern eyes, and how much we still do not understand about the inner life of the Jomon people who made them. Whatever they were for healing, fertility, spiritual communication, something we have not yet thought of, they were made with extraordinary care and skill. They were not casual objects, they were significant, they mattered to the people who made them. And they kept their secret when those people died. Mystery 3, the Yonaguni Monument, Natural Wonder or Lost, Civilisation. In 1995, off the southern coast of Yonaguni Island, the westernmost point of Japan, closer to Taiwan than to the Japanese mainland, a diving instructor named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the underwater terrain when he found something that should not have been there. A disoriented diver who found himself too far away from the Okinawa coast discovered a sunken group of megalithic blocks that appeared to be a human-made terraced structure. When he reported his finding, he sparked a hotly debated argument that continues to this day. The Yonaguni Monument, as it came to be called, is a massive underwater rock formation lying at depths of between 5 and 40 meters below the surface. It covers an area of approximately 150 by 40 meters, with a main terrace that rises about 27 meters from the sea floor. What makes it so controversial is what it looks like. It appears to have flat surfaces, right-angled corners, Steps, regular, repeated steps cut into the rock face that are strikingly similar to the stepped pyramids of Mesoamerica or Southeast Asia. There are what appear to be roads or channels running along its surface. There are what appear to be carved faces in the rock. There are holes and pillars that look, to many observers, like they were deliberately shaped rather than formed by natural geological processes. Japanese marine biologist Masaki Kimura has identified 10 structures off Yonaguni and a further 5 related structures. He has spent decades arguing that the monument is man-made, a structure built by a sophisticated civilization that was subsequently submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. If Kimura is right, the Yonaguni Monument is between 10,000 and 16,000 years old, built at a time when the Yonaguni area was above sea level and inhabited by people who were, apparently, capable of constructing monumental stone architecture. That would make it among the oldest structures in the world, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, built at a time when most historians have assumed that human societies were still relatively simple hunter-gatherer bands. The opposing view, held by most mainstream geologists and archaeologists, is that the monument is entirely natural. Yonaguni's geology is characterized by sandstone that cleaves along flat plains and right angles due to its crystalline structure. Waves and tidal action can produce remarkably regular formations in this kind of rock. The features that look artificial, the steps, the flat surfaces, the right angles, are all explicable as natural geological processes operating on a particularly susceptible type of rock. The debate has not been definitively resolved. Kimura points to specific features that he argues cannot be explained by natural processes: a carved stone that appears to be a human face, tool marks on certain surfaces, the overall regularity and interconnectedness of the structures. The geological mainstream points to similar natural formations found elsewhere in the world, and to the absence of any definitive archaeological evidence. No tools, no artifacts, no clearly artificial objects in or around the monument. The truth may lie somewhere between the two positions. Some features of the Yonaguni Monument may be natural formations that were subsequently modified by human hands, a naturally flat terrace that was shaped further, natural steps that were regularized. This kind of mixed natural and human origin would explain both the remarkable regularity of the structure and the absence of clearly artificial artifacts. Or it may be entirely natural or entirely artificial. We are still not sure. The Yonaguni Monument sits 30 meters below the Pacific Ocean, keeping its secret in the cold and the dark and the silence. Mystery 4: Who was Queen Himiko, and where is her tomb? In the 3rd century AD, Chinese chroniclers wrote about a remarkable figure in the islands they called Wa, the Japanese archipelago. She was a queen, a shamaness, a woman who had never married, who lived in seclusion, attended by 1,000 female servants and a single male who brought her food and transmitted her messages to the outside world. She ruled through spiritual authority rather than military force. She communicated with the gods and transmitted their will to her people. Her name was Himiko. The Chinese sources describe her as the ruler of a kingdom called Yamateikoku, a state that had emerged from a period of civil war among the various chiefdoms of the Japanese archipelago, whose spiritual authority had brought peace where political authority had failed. She sent envoys to the Chinese court and received gifts in return: bronze mirrors, silk, a golden seal, the title of Friend of Wei bestowed by the Chinese emperor. She was, by the standards of her time and place, a significant political figure. She died around 248 AD. The Chinese sources record that she was buried in a great mound and that 100 attendants were buried with her. And then the questions begin. Where was Yamate-koku? The Kofun believed to belong to Yamatoto Tohimoma, daughter of Emperor Kore, the seventh emperor of Japan, is another theory that suggests the tomb belongs to Himiko, ruler of Yamate-koku, which is theorized to be the origin of the Yamato court. This question has been debated by Japanese historians for over a century and has never been definitively answered. There are two main camps. One places Yamate-koku in the Kinai region of central Japan, the area around what is now Nara and Osaka, which would eventually become the heartland of the Yamato state and the Japanese Imperial dynasty. The other places it in northern Kyushu, the southernmost of Japan's main islands, much closer to the Korean peninsula and to China. Both interpretations have archaeological evidence in their favor. Both have problems. If Yamate-koku was in Kinai, it suggests a continuity between Himiko's kingdom and the later Yamato dynasty, that the Japanese imperial family descended from the shamaness queen described by the Chinese chronicles. This would give Himiko a direct line to the modern Japanese imperial family, who trace their ancestry back to the sun goddess Amaterasu. If Yamate-koku was in Kyushu, it suggests a more complicated picture, perhaps a powerful early kingdom that was eventually absorbed or replaced by the Yamato state of central Japan. The question of where Himiko is buried is equally unresolved. The Hashihaka Kofun, a keyhole-shaped burial mound in Nara Prefecture, is one candidate. It dates from approximately the right period. It is in the right region if the Kinai theory is correct, and it is the right scale for a ruler of Himiko's significance. The Nihon Shoki describes the construction as follows. The tomb was built by people during the day and by the gods at night. By day, stones from Mount Osaka were carried and used in its construction. From the mountain all the way to the tomb, people stood in lines passing the stones from hand to hand as they transporting them. But the Hashihaka Kofun, like all the great Kofun burial mounds, has not been excavated. The Imperial Household Agency, the government body that administers matters relating to the imperial family, restricts access to Kofun that are considered imperial tombs. If Himiko's tomb is inside one of these mounds, we may never know. The shamaness queen who ruled through spiritual authority rather than military force. The woman who lived in seclusion, attended by 1,000 servants, communicating with the gods. She is one of the most fascinating figures in the ancient Japanese world. And her final resting place remains unknown. Mystery 5, the SEALED-KOFUN tombs, what lies inside? Across the Japanese landscape, there are approximately 160,000 burial mounds. Kofun, old mounds. These burial mounds, shaped like keyholes, hold deep historical and cultural significance that dates back over a millennium. Inside were elaborate burial chambers made of wood or stone that held influential figures with all kinds of valuables: bronze mirrors, weapons, armor, clay vessels, and jewelry. The largest is the Daisen Kofun near modern-day Sakai in the Osaka area, traditionally attributed to Emperor Nintoku, stretching roughly 486 meters long, one of the largest tombs by area in the world. To put that in perspective, the Daisen Kofun is larger in area than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It covers approximately 460,000 square meters of land. It took, by estimates, approximately 4 years to construct with the labor of thousands of workers. Many of these tombs now lie overgrown and weathered, but at the zenith of the Yamato Empire, They would have been elegantly paved with stone and adorned with ceramic statues known as haniwa. The haniwa are extraordinary in their own right, hollow clay cylinders that evolved over time into figurines of extraordinary variety. Warriors on horseback, houses, boats, musicians, animals, priests. They were placed around the exterior of the kofun in rows, perhaps as spiritual guardians, perhaps as representations of the household and activities of the deceased, perhaps for purposes we still do not fully understand. Inside the kofun, in the sealed burial chambers, lie the bodies of Japan's ancient rulers, and the objects buried with them. We know from the kofun that have been excavated, the smaller ones, the ones that do not fall under imperial protection, that the burial goods were extraordinary. Decorated bronze mirrors known as shinjukai were imported from China. Iron weapons, elaborate jewelry of jade and jasper, clay vessels. The larger kofun, the ones attributed to the ancient emperors, have not been excavated in modern times. The Imperial Household Agency has consistently refused to permit archaeological investigation of the kofun that it administers as imperial tombs. The official justification is the preservation of the dignity and sanctity of the imperial ancestors. The tombs are sacred spaces, not archaeological sites, and disturbing them would be inappropriate. Critics, including many Japanese and international archaeologists, argue that this policy prevents the investigation of some of the most significant archaeological sites in East Asia. The kofun attributed to early emperors may contain objects of extraordinary historical importance, objects that could resolve questions about the origins of the Japanese state, the nature of early Japanese culture, and the connections between ancient Japan and the cultures of the Korean peninsula and China. There are also questions about what the kofun might reveal about the accuracy of the imperial lineage claims themselves. The Nihon Shoki and the Kojiki, the two great 8th century chronicles that record early Japanese history, attribute the great kofun to specific emperors whose reigns they date precisely. If the archaeology of the kofun were to contradict those dates significantly, it would raise uncomfortable questions about the historical accuracy of the official imperial genealogy. Some of the early emperors listed in the chronicles, with reigns of several decades and lifespans of over a century, are clearly mythological rather than historical figures. The question of where mythology ends and history begins in the early Japanese imperial lineage is one that the kofun might help to answer. The Imperial Household Agency has, on rare occasions, permitted limited non-invasive surveys of some kofun ground-penetrating radar aerial photography. These surveys have confirmed the presence of burial chambers and have revealed some of their dimensions. But no excavation, no opening, no direct investigation of what lies inside. 160,000 burial mounds, the largest tombs in the world, and most of them sealed by ancient tradition and by government policy from the eyes of modern scholarship. Mystery 6, the origins of the Japanese imperial dynasty. The Japanese imperial family is the oldest continuous hereditary monarchy in the world. The current emperor Naruhito is the 126th in a line that stretches back, according to the official chronicle, to the legendary emperor Jimmu, who is said to have ascended the throne in 660 BC. This would make the Japanese imperial dynasty more than 2,600 years old. Nothing else comes close. The British monarchy dates from the 11th century, the Danish monarchy from the 10th. The Japanese imperial line, if the tradition is taken at face value, predates all of them by more than a millennium. The problem is that the early emperors, the first 40 or 50 in the official list, are almost certainly mythological rather than historical. Emperor Jimmu himself, the legendary first emperor, is said to have been the great-great-great-grandson of the sun goddess Amaterasu. He lived, according to the chronicle, to the age of 127 years. His successors have similarly implausible lifespans. One lived to over 150, another to 140. These numbers are not historical. They are mythological, inflated to create a sense of ancient lineage, to push the dynasty back far enough that it predates the founding of Chinese dynasties that the Japanese court wanted to match or surpass in antiquity. The question is, where does the mythology end and the history begin? Most scholars place the historical origins of the Japanese imperial dynasty somewhere in the 3rd or 4th century AD, in the period of the Kofun culture, when the Yamato state was consolidating its control over central Japan. This is when the great Kofun were built. This is when the archaeological and, to some extent, Chinese historical evidence supports the existence of a unified Japanese polity. Some describe the mysterious century as a time of internecine warfare, as various local monarchies competed for hegemony on Kyushu and Honshu. But even within the historical period, questions remain. Who exactly were the founders of the Yamato dynasty? Where did they come from? Were they indigenous to the Japanese archipelago, or did they arrive from the Korean peninsula, bringing with them the bronze and iron technology and the continental culture that characterizes the Yayoi period? The genetic evidence suggests significant continental influence. The ruling elites of the Kofun period appear to have had substantial Korean and Chinese ancestry, distinct from the general Yayoi population. Much of Japanese influence came from immigration from China across the Korean peninsula, causing a common shared culture across southern Korea, Kyushu, and Honshu. There are persistent theories, controversial, disputed but not easily dismissed, that the founders of the Yamato dynasty were immigrants from the Korean peninsula who established themselves as rulers over the existing population. The similarities between the Korean Gaya Confederation's material culture and the early Japanese Kofun culture are striking. Similar pottery styles, similar burial practices, similar bronze mirrors. The political sensitivity of this question in Japan, where the idea of Korean origin for the imperial dynasty touches on fraught questions of Japanese national identity and Japan-Korea relations, has made it difficult to discuss openly. The official position of the imperial household is that the dynasty descends from the gods. The academic consensus is that it emerged from the consolidation of power by Yayoi-descended elites in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. The full truth lies somewhere in the sealed chambers of the Kofun, and in the DNA of the past, and in the documents that have been lost or deliberately suppressed over 17 centuries of imperial history. Mystery 7. The Lost Texts of Ancient Japan. In the year 712 AD, a court scholar named Ono Yasumaro completed the Kojiki, the record of ancient matters, on the orders of the Empress Genmei. 8 years later, in 720, the Nihon Shoki, the Chronicles of Japan, was completed by a committee of scholars. These two texts are the oldest surviving chronicles of Japanese history and mythology. They record the age of the gods, the creation of the islands, the divine ancestry of the imperial family, and the history of Japan from the mythological beginnings through to the early 7th century. They are extraordinary documents. They are also almost certainly not the first attempts to write Japanese history down. Both the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki refer to older documents, earlier chronicles and records that they drew upon. The Kojiki specifically mentions a text called the Teiki and another called the Kyuji, dynastic records and old tales, as sources. These earlier documents no longer exist. Some were destroyed deliberately. The political situation of 7th century Japan was turbulent. There were succession disputes, political purges, attempts by various factions to control the narrative of Japanese history to support their own claims to power. Documents that told the wrong story were dangerous. Some were simply lost, in fires, in floods, in the ordinary entropy of the centuries. What was in them? We do not know. We know they existed because the surviving chronicles reference them. We know they contained historical and mythological material that predated the surviving texts. We know that the compilers of the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki selected from them, chose what to include and what to leave out. What was left out may be the most interesting question. There are hints in the surviving texts that the official version of ancient Japanese history is a simplification, an editing, a selection designed to serve the purposes of the 8th century imperial court. Certain clans that appear briefly and then disappear, certain events mentioned obliquely and never explained. Certain regional traditions that conflict with the official narrative, and that may represent the traces of an older, more complex history that was smoothed over in the process of creating the official chronicle. Japan also had a tradition of provincial records, the Fudoki, compiled in the early 8th century, recording the local history, legends, products, and place names of each province. Most of these have been lost. Only 5 survive in complete or near-complete form. The others exist only in fragments quoted in later documents. In those lost provincial records may have been local traditions, local histories, local mythologies that contradicted or complicated the official imperial narrative, local accounts of the conquest of their regions by the expanding Yamato state, local versions of the creation myths that differed from the official Amaterasu tradition. We will never know. The fires of history are patient and thorough. What burned is gone. But the fact that so much was written down, and that so much of what was written down has been lost, tells us that ancient Japan was literate, was historically minded, was concerned with recording its own story. The version of that story that survived is not the whole story. It is the version that the victors of the 7th century political struggles wanted posterity to know. The rest went up in smoke, or rotted quietly in forgotten storehouses, or was deliberately suppressed by people who understood that history is power. Mystery 8. The Japanese petroglyphs and their ancient connectons. Scattered across Japan, carved into rock faces and stone surfaces in dozens of locations, are images. Petroglyphs, rock carvings that have been dated by their context and style to various periods of ancient Japanese history, some of them potentially going back to the Jomon period or even earlier. These images are fascinating in themselves. Geometric patterns, human figures, animals, boats, spirals and cup marks and shapes that repeat across different sites in ways that suggest a shared visual tradition, a shared symbolic language. But some researchers have noted something more provocative. Do Japanese petroglyphs reveal prehistoric connections with the ancient Sumerian Akkadian Elamite or Phoenician civilizations? This question, raised seriously by some researchers, dismissed by most mainstream archaeologists, points to specific features of some Japanese petroglyphs that appear to resemble symbols found in Near Eastern writing systems of the ancient world. The resemblance, when it is pointed out, can be striking. Certain Jomon period symbols bear a visual similarity to proto-cuneiform marks. Certain Japanese rock carvings look like they might share something with Phoenician alphabetic symbols. Is this evidence of ancient transoceanic contact, of connections between Japan and the ancient civilizations of the Middle East that predate recorded history? Almost certainly not, and here it is important to be careful, because the history of claims about prehistoric transoceanic contact between Japan and other civilizations is littered with wishful thinking and motivated reasoning. Visual similarity between symbols from different cultures is not evidence of contact. Human beings producing symbols independently tend to converge on similar forms, spirals, circles, straight lines, cup marks, because these are the natural results of hands carving into stone. The same basic shapes appear in petroglyphs from cultures that had absolutely no connection to each other, on every inhabited continent in every period of prehistory. But the Japanese petroglyphs are genuinely interesting and genuinely mysterious for reasons that do not require ancient transoceanic contact. The concentration of petroglyphs in certain areas of Japan, particularly in coastal regions and on the shores of rivers, suggests they may have served navigational purposes, marking routes or significant locations. The consistency of certain symbols across wide geographic areas suggests the existence of shared cultural traditions extending across regions. And some of the petroglyphs remain undated. We do not know who made them, when, or why. They are marks left by people on stone surfaces in places that mattered to them for reasons they understood. The reasons have not survived. Mystery 9: The Real History of the Ninja. Ninja. The black-clad assassins of Japanese popular culture. The shadow warriors who could walk through walls, become invisible, defeat armies of samurai with supernatural skill, and disappear without a trace. They are, after samurai, the most internationally recognizable element of Japanese feudal culture. Hollywood has made them superhuman. Video games have given them magical powers. Manga and anime have turned them into archetypes. The real ninja were something considerably more interesting than the legend, and considerably more mysterious, because the secrecy that was central to their practice means that reliable historical evidence about them is genuinely scarce. The historical ninja, the shinobi as they were known in their own time, were covert operatives employed by the lords and warlords of feudal Japan for intelligence gathering, infiltration, sabotage, and assassination. They operated primarily in the Sengoku period, the era of warring states from the late 15th to the late 16th century, when Japan was fragmented into dozens of competing domains whose lords were constantly maneuvering against each other. The most famous ninja came from two regions, Iga Province and Koka Province, in the mountainous area of what is now Mai and Shiga prefectures. The communities of these regions developed specialized traditions of covert warfare that were passed down through family lineages, kept secret from outsiders, and employed by various lords who needed someone to do the things that samurai, with their code of open honor combat, could not properly do. The secrecy was the point, and the secrecy is the problem historically. Because the ninja were covert operators who deliberately left no trace, the historical record about them is frustratingly thin. What we know comes mostly from later documents, manuals of ninjutsu technique compiled in the 17th and 18th centuries, after the Sengoku period had ended and the Tokugawa peace had made the ninja largely redundant. These manuals describe techniques and principles, but they were written by people looking back at a tradition that was already fading. The ninja were not supernatural, they were not invisible, they could not walk through walls. What they were was trained extensively, practically, in the genuine skills of infiltration and survival. They were skilled at disguise, at passing as merchants, priests, performers, ordinary civilians, at gathering information without being noticed, at moving through terrain at night without detection, at the use of weapons and poisons. Many of the techniques described in the historical manuals are genuinely sophisticated, and some of them have been validated by modern practitioners of historical Japanese martial arts. But the gap between the historical shinobi and the Hollywood ninja is so enormous that the connection between them is mostly nominal. The real mystery is not what the ninja could do, but what they actually did. How much of the history of the Sengoku period, whose complex politics and constant warfare shaped the Japan that emerged under the Tokugawa, was influenced by their operations, which assassinations were their work, which battles were decided by intelligence that shinobi gathered. We do not know, because they were very good at leaving no trace. Mystery 10. The disappearance of the Jomon world. Around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened in Japan. The world changed. The Ice Age was ending, glaciers were retreating, the sea levels, which had been dramatically lower during the glacial maximum, were rising. The land bridges that had connected the Japanese islands to the Asian mainland, the bridges that had allowed the ancestors of the Jomon people to walk into the archipelago following the herds of animals, were being slowly submerged. Japan was becoming an island nation for the first time. The rising seas transformed the coastline dramatically. Areas that had been inhabited, valleys, coastal plains, the mouths of rivers, were submerged. The people who had lived there had to move. And the climate was changing. The cold, dry conditions of the Ice Age were giving way to something warmer and wetter. The vegetation was changing. The animals that had been hunted were changing. The entire ecological context of human life in the Japanese archipelago was being transformed. The Jomon people adapted. They were extraordinarily resilient. They had been adapting to changing conditions for 14,000 years by this point, through glacial cold and warming and the transformation of their island world from connected landmass to archipelago. The question of when the culture of food cultivation began and how people confronted unprecedented cataclysms is part of the great Jomon journey where science and romance intersect. But around 300 BC, something happened that the Jomon world did not survive. The Yayoi people arrived. They came from the continent, probably from the Korean peninsula, bringing with them wet rice agriculture, bronze and iron. They settled in the western parts of Japan, Kyushu and western Honshu, and their population began to grow rapidly. Rice farming could support far larger populations than the hunter-gatherer lifestyle of the Jomon. Over the following centuries, the Yayoi culture spread eastward across the main islands. The Jomon retreated northward into Tohoku and eventually into Hokkaido. The great question is how this transition happened. Was it violent? Was it peaceful? Was it a gradual mixing over centuries or a rapid displacement? The genetic evidence suggests mixing. Modern Japanese people carry genetic contributions from both Jomon and Yayoi populations, but the proportions vary significantly by region, and the speed of the transition is uncertain. Some recent research suggests the transition was faster and more complete in some regions than models based purely on gradual mixing would predict, suggesting that there may have been periods of more dramatic population displacement, perhaps associated with environmental stress or conflict. And then there is the question of what happened to the Jomon culture itself. The elaborate spiritual practices, the Dogu figurines, the stone circles, the complex pottery traditions, all of this gradually disappears from the archaeological record as the Yayoi culture expands, not overnight, but progressively, region by region, as Yayoi cultural practices replace Jomon ones. What did the Jomon people themselves think about what was happening to their world? Did they understand that their way of life was ending? Did they resist? Did they embrace the new agricultural way of life? We have no way to know. They left no written records. Their Dogu figures are silent. The Jomon world that had endured for 14,000 years, through the end of the Ice Age, through the flooding of the land bridges, through all the transformations of the ancient world, ended quietly and incompletely, absorbed into something new. Their genetic legacy persists in every Japanese person alive today. Their artistic legacy, the love of natural forms, the sensitivity to materials, the aesthetic of wabi-sabi that finds beauty in the imperfect and the transient may also persist, transmitted not through genes but through the cultural residue of 14,000 years of living on these islands. The Jomon are not entirely gone, but the world they built is. And the mystery of how that world ended, and what was lost when it did, is one that the sands and the sea levels and the passing centuries have buried very deep. Closing, the island keeps its secrets. And so our 10 Japanese mysteries come to rest. The Jomon and their ancient origins, the Dogu figurines broken in ritual silence, the underwater monument at Yonaguni that may or may not be the work of human hands, the shamaness Queen Himiko and her sealed tomb, the 160,000 burial mounds that no archaeologist has fully opened, the origins of the Imperial dynasty that stretches back into mythology, the lost texts that were burned or suppressed or simply fell to dust, the rock carvings on ancient shores, the real shadow warriors who left no trace, and the disappearance of the oldest human world in the islands. 10 questions 10 doors that Japan has not yet opened. There is something fitting about this. Japan is a country that has always understood the value of what is kept hidden. The tokonoma alcove in the traditional room, where one perfect object is displayed and everything else is withheld. The Shinto inner sanctuary which no ordinary person may enter. The sealed garden glimpsed through a gate. Mystery is not an absence of meaning, it is a preservation of it. The thing not fully seen retains its power in ways that the thing fully revealed cannot. Japan has kept its deepest secrets well. Let those mysteries settle around you now, like mist over an ancient forest. The Dogu with its goggle eyes staring at something no modern person can see. The Yonaguni Monument 30 meters below the Pacific, its terraces and steps in the cold and the dark. The Kofun covered in grass keeping its burial chamber sealed against the years. The shamaness queen receiving her Chinese gifts, communicating with gods that no longer answer. Let the questions grow quiet. There is no need to resolve them tonight. The island has kept them for thousands of years. It will keep them a little longer. And sleep, a soft, deep, dreamless sleep. Good night.